So every year I seem to be getting a similar question from students about a trading example that is given with a production possibilities frontier, which gives two individuals and two different goods, just like this one over here. So there's a few things that you have to consider when answering this question. First off, if you read the question right, you're going to see that in this question, they're asking about this individual wants to improve his consumption possibilities. So if ever you calculate the opportunity cost and give that answer as your right answer, it's definitely going to be wrong, because as seen in class or in the videos, you can see that if you simply have a trading term that is equal to your opportunity cost, you're not gaining anything from this trade. If I could produce 2 coconuts or 1 snowboard, well, if you trade with me and I give you 1 snowboard and you give me 2 coconuts in exchange, well, if I would have had the situation where I would have given up producing the snowboard and I would produce coconuts instead, I would have had the exact same outcome. So I'm not improving my consumption possibilities in that situation. So one thing to consider is that. And the second thing that you have to consider is, if you think of the timelines that we draw to determine the range that is acceptable by both, well, one of the individuals wants to be at one extreme of this timeline and the other one wants to be at the other extreme. So if I'm talking about 2 goods, X and Y, and I'm the one that's bringing X to the table, well, if on this spectrum we're looking at the amount of units of Y per X, well, I want to get as much as possible of that product. So if you think of this multiple choice question, essentially the answer has to be one of the 2 extremes if you're going to improve your consumption potential, the way it's normally structured. But sometimes it might not always be structured that way, so you still want to be able to calculate it out. But if I'm supplying good X, I want to have as much as possible of Y as possible, and that's often going to be the answer. But if my trade-off is like 2 to 1, and I'm supplying the good that has 1, and I normally produce 2 of the other good, well, I want to be in this situation that at least if I give up 1 of these snowboards, I need to get at least more than 2 of the coconuts. So if there's the answer 3, that's going to be the appropriate answer. There won't be many answers that improve the consumption possibilities. There'll only be one, but it's going to be one of those 2 extremes. So it's just something that you have to keep in mind when answering this question. Keep in mind who's supplying what. And the second thing that seems to be a mistake is calculating the actual opportunity cost. Instead of going through some of those intermediate steps and saying this is the amount of how much of each that they can produce and dividing them somehow, go to the 2 different extremes. In class, we often talked about, like, in a whole day, what can I produce if I'm only producing this good or if I'm only producing this other good? So my trade-off is this amount of this good or this amount of this good in the whole day. So look at the 2 extremes. If I produce none of good X, how much Y can I produce? And if I produce 0 Y, how much X can I produce? And set those equal to one another and then put it on a per X or per Y framework, and you're going to have this situation where you can actually see the right trade-off. If you go for those intermediate points, it's not saying that it's bad, but a lot of people kind of get things wrong. They don't really look at the actual cost of adding 1 more unit of production or 40 more units of production. They're actually kind of just divvying up those 2 different points on that graph, and that doesn't work. Well, that's it for me. Hopefully that was interesting for you guys to look at and try to understand that kind of question about production possibilities frontier in a different framework and different setup than just seeing the numbers, having a graph to do it, and how you could answer a question that asks about improving consumption possibilities. That's it for me. Thanks for watching.